The war was declared in a voice that had never known defeat, and for a moment, the universe itself seemed to listen. It didn't come as a shout. No thunder. No chaos. Just a transmission. Perfectly clean, perfectly precise. Cutting to the void like a blade drawn across silence. Across human space, every receiver woke at once. Old satellites that hadn't spoken in decades flickered back to life. Civilian channels froze mid-sentence. Deep space relays, buried in the dark between stars, lit up with sudden, unnatural clarity. The message did not travel. It arrived, unstoppable, unavoidable, absolute, on Earth. In cities layered with glass and light, people stopped mid-step without knowing why. A child looked up at the sky, as if something had just passed overhead. Pilots in orbit felt their instruments stutter, not fail, just hesitate. Even the ocean seemed to still, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Then the words came. You are to be erased. No distortion, no emotion, no room for interpretation. A sentence so simple, it carried the weight of extinction. And for a heartbeat, just one, humanity listened, not with panic, not with screams, with stillness. Because somewhere deep in the bones of the species, older than language, older than fear, there was recognition, not of the enemy, not of the threat, of the moment. Far from Earth, beyond the bright edges of mapped territory, a lone command station drifted in orbit around a fading blue star. Its surface was scarred, not from battle, but from time. Layers of reinforced plating, silent weapon arrays, observation decks that had watched the dark for years without interruption. Inside, the command deck glowed in muted tones. No alarms, no frantic movement, just quiet. Admiral Kale Vera stood at the center of it all, hands resting lightly on the edge of a console that hummed with restrained power. The transmission played once, then again, then dissolved into memory as systems archive it across every secure layer. No one spoke. Around her, officers waited, not frozen, not confused, but suspended in that same unnatural pause the entire species seemed to share, waiting for something. For her, Vera didn't react immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the viewport ahead, where distant stars burned like cold witnesses. Somewhere out there, something had decided humanity's story was over. She let that thought settle, felt its weight, measured it, and then, slowly, something changed behind her eyes. Not fear, not anger. Something quieter, something far more dangerous. Relief. A breath escaped her lips, almost too soft to hear. Years of preparation, of watching, of waiting for the galaxy to make the first undeniable move, all of it condensed into this single, irreversible moment. The uncertainty was gone. The waiting was over. She leaned forward slightly, the faint glow of the console reflecting across her face, sharpening the calm into something unbreakable. When she finally spoke, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because every system on that station, every human presence connected to it, heard her as if she were standing beside them. One word, simple, certain, finally, and in that instant, without a single shot fired, the war had already begun. The station did not look like the heart of humanity's future. It looked like something forgotten, orbiting a dim, aging blue star on the outer edge of mapped space. The bastion hung in silence, its surface layered with mismatched plating, scars of retrofitted upgrades, and weapon systems that had never once been tested in open war. No grand insignias, no gleaming displays of power. From a distance, it could have been mistaken for a relic drifting toward irrelevance. That illusion was intentional. Inside, nothing was accidental. The command deck stretched in a wide arc, built for clarity over comfort. Transparent panels displayed overlapping tactical projections, stellar maps, energy signatures, dormant systems marked in quiet green. The air carried a faint metallic tang, filtered and recycled so many times it had lost any trace of origin. Even the lighting was subdued, designed to sharpen focus rather than soothe nerves. Admiral Kale Vera stood at the center of it all, not elevated, not hidden behind layers of command hierarchy. Present, her uniform was unadorned, no excessive markings, no decorative rank displays. Just a subtle insignia of authority etched into the fabric itself. Years of command had carved precision into every movement she made. Even her stillness felt deliberate, like a held breath that could become action at any moment. Around her, the crew moved with a quiet efficiency that bordered on unnatural. No shouting, no panic, only preparation. Data streamed across consoles and control flows, officers exchanging minimal words, each one exact necessary. They had drilled this moment too many times to mistake it for anything else. Not a surprise, a confirmation. They've crossed the outer markers. One operator reported, voice steady. Vera didn't turn. All of them. A pause. Fingers danced across a hollow interface, pulling deeper scans. More than expected. Not fear, just data adjusting. Beyond the viewport, space remained deceptively calm. The distant star flickered with slow, dying intensity, casting a cold glow across the station's hull. It wasn't a place chosen for beauty. It was chosen because no one important would look here, and that had been humanity's advantage. For decades, the galaxy had watched Earth, watched its expansion, measured its growth. Every treaty, every border, every political move had been tracked, analyzed, constrained. But they hadn't watched this. Hidden in the quiet margins of known space, humanity had built something different. Not larger fleets, not louder weapons. Infrastructure, positioning, time. Vera's gaze drifted across the tactical display, where faint outlines, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, marked dormant assets scattered across the system. Satellites disguised as debris, stations masked as abandoned mining rigs, signals buried beneath cosmic radiation noise. Sleeping, waiting. An officer stepped closer, lowering their voice instinctively. Admiral, if they commit full force, this station won't hold. Vera finally turned. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to meet their eyes. It doesn't need to, she said. The words settled into the room, not as reassurance, but as truth, because this station was never meant to be a fortress. It was a trigger, a focal point, a place where everything converged when the galaxy made its decision. And now it had. Across the deck, another update flashed into existence. Enemy fleet signatures increasing, formations tightening, vectors aligning toward the system like a storm that had already decided where it would strike. Still, no alarm sounded, because alarms imply surprise, and there was none left here. Vera turned back toward the stars, watching the darkness where something massive was approaching. For years, humanity had endured pressure, suspicion, containment disguised as diplomacy. They had adapted, they had learned, they had waited, and now, as the first faint distortions of incoming warships began to ripple through space, one quiet certainty settled into place across the command deck. This was never about surviving the war. It was about being ready when it finally arrived. The first ships didn't arrive. They replaced the stars. At the edge of the system, where darkness had always been uninterrupted, space began to fold. Not violently, not explosively, but with a quiet distortion that bent light into unfamiliar angles. One by one, pinpoints of distant starlight vanished, swallowed behind shapes that had not existed a moment before. On the command deck, no one spoke. They watched, because there was something deeply wrong about the way the enemy entered reality. No flare of engines, no rupture of space. Just presence, sudden, absolute, undeniable. Contact confirmed. An operator said, voice low, controlled. Multiple signatures escalating. The tactical display bloomed red. At first, it seemed manageable. A handful of markers, evenly spaced, drifting into formation with surgical precision. But then more appeared. And more. And more. Each new arrival didn't just add to the count. It rewrote the scale. Hundreds. Then thousands. The system map struggled to keep up, shrinking its own resolution just to fit the incoming mass. What had once been open space was now crowded with vessels so large they distorted gravitational readings, their hulls shimmering with layered energy fields that flickered like heat over metal. They're not deploying in waves, someone whispered. They're deploying all at once. Admiral Kale Vera didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the projection, tracking movement patterns that were too clean, too deliberate. The enemy fleet wasn't spreading. It wasn't probing defenses or testing reactions. It was positioning, perfect geometry, perfect confidence, as if they had already simulated every possible outcome and decided none of them required caution. They're locking vectors. Another officer reported, primary weapons aligning with the station. A pause. Secondary arrays, planetary direction. That word settled heavier than anything else. Planetary, not just a battle. An ending. Across the deck, subtle changes began to surface. Tightened grips on consoles, slower breaths. Glances exchanged just a fraction too long. Discipline held. But the pressure was building now, rise like a tide no one could stop. Because this wasn't skirmish. This wasn't a test. This was annihilation, delivered with the calm certainty of a species that had never needed to doubt itself. Vera finally moved, just a step forward. The motion drew every eye in the room, not because it was dramatic, but because it meant something had shifted. A line had been crossed, invisible but absolute. "Rain," she asked. "Closing fast," came a reply. "They're not slowing." Of course they weren't. Why would they? From their perspective, this wasn't a battle to win. It was a task to complete. Outside the viewport, the distant flicker of the dying star seemed to dim further, its light swallowed by the growing mass of warships now dominating the system. For a moment, it looked as though the star itself was being consumed, not by fire, but by inevitability. "They're not even hailing," an officer said quietly. "No warnings, no demands, no negotiation, just execution." The realization spread through the room like cold water. Humanity had not been challenged. It had been judged and sentenced. Vera's fingers rested lightly against the console, feeling the faint vibration of the station's core systems humming beneath her touch. Beneath that, deeper, something else waited. Silent, patient, prepared. She let the weight of the moment settle completely. Every ship, every weapon, every impossible number stacked against them. And then she exhaled, slow, controlled, because this overwhelming, suffocating pressure, this was a moment everything had been built for. The enemy believed they had arrived at the beginning of the war. They hadn't. They had arrived at the part humanity had already planned beyond. And somewhere, beneath the rising tension, beneath the quiet fear threading to the deck, a different realization began to take shape. Unspoken, but undeniable. This wasn't the point where humanity broke. This was the point where it finally answered. Open channel. The words didn't rise above a command tone, but they carried something heavier than urgency. Finality. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. Not because they hadn't heard her, but because every instinct trained into them resisted the idea. You don't open communication with a force that arrives like extinction. You don't speak when the enemy has already decided your silence. But this was not hesitation. This was execution. Channel open, the comms officer confirmed, fingers hovering just above the console, as if even the act of connection might trigger something irreversible. Across the void, the human signal surged outward. Clean, stable, unmistakable. It cut through the enemy fleet's layered defenses, bypassed their encryption protocols, ignored the silence they had imposed on the battlefield. Not forced. Accepted. That was the first anomaly. "They're receiving it," the officer said, confusion threading into their voice. No resistance. Of course they weren't resisting. They didn't see it as a threat. Not yet. Admiral Kale Vera stepped forward, her reflection faintly visible in the glass of the viewport. Human, small, standing before a force that could erase stars. "Begin broadcast," she said. The transmission didn't start with words. It started with a signal. Across the system, something ancient woke. Dead satellites, long classified as debris, flickered to life. Abandoned stations, left drifting for decades, began transmitting. Invisible relay nodes hidden in the shadows of asteroid belts activated in perfect synchronization. Signals layered over signals, building a network so vast it had never once been fully mapped, not even by humanity itself. "What is that?" someone whispered. Vera didn't answer, because what they were seeing wasn't new. It was revealed. The enemy fleet shifted slightly. Barely perceptible, but enough to register across tactical displays. Formation patterns tightened. Scanning arrays intensified, sweeping through space in widening arcs, searching for the source of this sudden, impossible network. They wouldn't find it, not all of it, because it wasn't centralized. It was everywhere. Energy signatures increasing across the system. An operator reported, voice tightening now. Multiple points, no. Hundreds, no. Thousands. The display began to change. Not dramatically, not explosively. Quietly, one by one, regions of empty space gained definition. Shadows became structure. Static became signal. The void, once assumed to be nothing, started resolving into something far more precise. Presence. Hidden fleets. Not emerging. Not arriving. Simply acknowledged. They were already here. The realization came, barely a breath. All this time. The enemy fleet reacted now. Subtle adjustments rippling through their formation. Not retreat. Not attack. Recalculation. For the first time since their arrival, uncertainty entered their movement. And that was the second anomaly. Vera's voice finally cut into the transmission, calm and unshaken, carried across every channel now intertwined with the awakened network. "We listen," she said. "No anger, no threat, just truth. For years we listened while you watched us grow." The signal pulsed outward, reinforced by thousands of hidden nodes. Each one amplified her voice into something impossible to ignore. "You thought we were building outward." A pause. The system itself seemed to hold still. "We weren't." The tactical display finished resolving. What had once been a lone human station now sat at the center of an entire unseen lattice of power. Ships, weapons, infrastructure, all positioned long before the enemy ever crossed the system's edge. The third anomaly came quietly. The enemy fleet stopped advancing, not because they were afraid, because they no longer understood what they were looking at. Vera stood motionless, eyes locked on projection, watching the shift ripple through the opposing force. They had come expecting a target. They had found a design. And for the first time since the war had been declared, the certainty that had carried them across the stars began to fracture, not into fear, but into something far more dangerous. Doubt. The first shot the enemy fired was perfect. It had to be. A beam of compressed energy, focused, absolute, engineered to erase matter at the molecular level, cut across the void with flawless precision. It didn't hesitate. It didn't waver. It traveled exactly where their system said the human command station existed. And for a fraction of a second, it worked. On one display, the station vanished, consumed in a silent bloom of light that left nothing behind. No debris, no signal, just absence. Direct hit confirmed. An enemy channel transmitted across intercepted frequencies. But on the command deck, nothing happened. Admiral Kale, Vera, didn't flinch. The floor beneath her feet remained steady. The hum of the station's core continued uninterrupted, a quiet, constant rhythm beneath everything. "Impact status?" an officer asked, voice tight despite their control. Another scan flickered across the console. Then another. No damage detected. A pause. No impact detected. The contradiction settled into the room like something alive. Outside, the battlefield fractured into disagreement. In one stream of data, the station was gone. In another, it had shifted position moments before impact. In a third, the shot had never been fired at all. Flagged instead as a phantom command lost in corrupted targeting logs. 3 outcomes. 1 action. No consensus. "They're firing again," someone warned. This time, dozens of weapons ignited across the enemy fleet. Lances of energy tore through space, converging from impossible angles, calculated to leave no escape vector, no margin for error. And again, they hit, and missed, and never existed. All at once, the human station flickered across their sensors, not visually, but conceptually, occupying positions that could not be reconciled into a single point. It was there. It wasn't. It had been. It would be. Target lock unstable. An enemy signal broke through, no longer calm, no longer certain. "We cannot resolve." The transmission cut, because something else had begun. "Admiral," a human operator said quietly, eyes wide but voice steady. "They're losing coherence." Vera nodded once. "Begin phase 2. No dramatic gesture, no raised voice, just a command that had been waiting for this exact moment. Across a hidden network, the system awakened fully. Human ships moved, not in chaotic bursts, not in desperate reaction, but with a precision that felt inevitable. Formations unfolded like equations resolving, vectors shifting in perfect synchronization with the distortions already breaking the enemy's perception. They didn't charge. They aligned. Enemy vessels tried to respond, rotating, recalibrating, firing again, but their own systems betrayed them now. Targets duplicated. Coordinates overlapped. Entire squadrons registered themselves as both present and destroyed simultaneously. Confusion spread, not emotional, but structural. Command chains fractured as ships disagreed on reality itself. And that was when humanity struck, not with overwhelming force, with accuracy. A single enemy flagship lost power, not destroyed, just removed from the equation. Its signals vanished across every layer at once, leaving a void that couldn't be explained by damage reports. Another followed, then another, each lost small in isolation, catastrophic in pattern. They're targeting our interpretation layers. An enemy voice transmitted, strained, unstable. They're not attacking ships, they're attacking. Silence, because the realization came too late. Vera's voice spread across the battlefield, carried through the same network that had once only listened. "You prepare to destroy us," she said calm, unshaken. A pause. "But you never prepare to understand us." Human fleets tightened their formation, not aggressively, but definitively, occupying positions that could no longer be ignored, no longer dismissed, no longer misread. The enemy fired again, and this time, their own systems refused to confirm it had happened. Across the void, certainty collapsed, and in its place, something new took hold. Not fear, not yet, but the first, irreversible crack in a force that had never before needed to question what was real. Uncertainty. And humanity moved forward into it like it had been theirs all along. The war did not end with an explosion. It ended with something far quieter and far more final. Across the battlefield, the last fragments of the enemy fleet drifted in broken formation, not shattered by overwhelming firepower, but undone by something they had never learned to defend against. Their ships still existed. Their weapons still functioned. Their power had not been stripped away. Only their certainty had. And without that, they faltered on the command deck. The silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of aftermath, of something vast settling into place after years, decades, of tension finally released. Enemy retreat confirmed. An officer said, almost disbelieving. Multiple vectors uncoordinated. No triumphant cheer followed. No celebration. Because what they were witnessing wasn't victory in the way humanity had once imagined it. It was transformation. Admiral Kale Vera stood where she had always stood, her gaze fixed on the viewport as the enemy ships began to withdraw, not in orderly precision, but in fragmented hesitation. Some vanished into jump corridors too early, their trajectories unstable. Others lingered just a moment too long, as if waiting for a command that would never come. "They don't trust their own systems anymore," someone whispered. Vera didn't answer, because she understood something deeper. They didn't trust their own reality anymore. Outside, the hidden human fleet remained in position, not pursuing, not pressing the advantage, just present, solid, unmistakable. For the first time since the war had been declared, there was no distortion around them, no ambiguity, no conflicting signals. Humanity had chosen to be seen, and that choice carried more weight than any weapon. "Stand down, forward strike patterns," Vera ordered quietly. A few heads turned at that, not in confusion, but in recognition of what it meant. The enemy was exposed, vulnerable, disoriented. This was the moment to finish it. She let the thought pass. "We're not ending them," she continued. "We're ending what they thought we were." The command spread to the fleet instantly, reshaping formations, easing tension without dissolving readiness. Weapons powered down, not fully, not recklessly, but enough to signal something unmistakable. This was not annihilation. This was a message. Across the void, one final transmission carried outward, not forced, not amplified, just clear. "We heard you," Vera said, her voice steady as ever. "Every warning, every threat, every decision you made without us." A pause, and we adapted. The words settled into the retreating fleet, following them into the dark between stars. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, one by one, the last enemy signatures disappeared, jumping away, not as conquerors withdrawing from a completed task, but as something else entirely. Witnesses, left with a truth they could not unlearn. On the command deck, the tension finally released, not in noise, not in relief, but in breath. Slow, measured, human. Vera remained still a moment longer, watching the empty space where the enemy had once dominated. The stars returned, unobstructed, quiet, but no longer distant. Behind her, the station hummed with life, with purpose, no longer a hidden bastion waiting in the dark, but the center of something that had finally stepped into the light. Humanity had not begged, had not broken, had not even truly fought in the way the galaxy expected. It had waited, it had learned, and when war came, it had answered, not with rage, not with fear, but with something far more enduring. Understanding turned into power. Vera closed her eyes for a brief second, feeling the weight of it settle, then fade. When she opened them again, her voice was quiet, but it carried across every system, every ship, every human listening. "Now," she said softly, "they know.